"Get her out of my range." Brooks said it loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough to make sure there was no confusion about who he meant or why. Maya didn't move. She stood at the firing line, carbine in her hands, eyes downrange, completely still, while 30 soldiers waited to see what she would do. "You don't belong here," he said. "And that little Black Talon stunt in the supply room, everybody's laughing at you." Maya turned her head slowly and looked at him. Just looked. "Are you finished?" she said quietly. Brooks stepped forward. He had no idea he was already losing. If this story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning. Maya Carter arrived at Fort Raven Ridge. The sky was the color of old pewter, heavy and flat, the kind of sky that felt like a warning nobody had the nerve to read out loud. She came in on a shuttle with 11 other transfers. 11 soldiers with thick folders, visible patches, unit insignias, stitched into their shoulders like trophies. They talked the whole ride over, comparing deployments, naming officers they'd worked under, testing each other to see who outranked whom before they even stepped through the gate. Maya sat in the second-to-last seat, window side. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She had a small bag, the kind of bag that said, "I don't plan on staying long," and a file jacket so thin you could have mistaken it for a supply memo. When the shuttle doors opened and the transfers filed out into the processing yard, a staff sergeant named Doyle stood with a clipboard and read names like he was calling cattle to feed. He had the voice of a man who believed volume was the same thing as authority. "Hernandez. Here. Watkins. Here, Sergeant. Pullman Reed Ochoa." He moved through the list without looking up once. When he reached the last name, there was a half-second pause, a flicker of something, confusion maybe, or mild irritation. "Carter. Here." Doyle looked up for the first time. His eyes went to her, once, then went back to the list, then came back to her like he'd made a mistake and was checking his work. "Carter Maya. That's me." He stared at her. The way men stare at things they can't immediately categorize. Not hostile exactly, but not respectful either. Just blank. Assessing. "Weapons specialist." "Yes, Sergeant." He wrote something on his clipboard. Something she couldn't read. Probably wouldn't have wanted to. "Processing is through the east corridor," he said. "Equipment issue is second door on the left." He moved on before she finished nodding. The equipment issue room smelled like gun oil and old canvas, the familiar smell of military supply depots everywhere in the world. Metal shelves, fluorescent lights, a long counter with 2 supply officers working behind it like men who had stopped caring about their jobs sometime in the previous decade. Maya stood in line. She waited her turn with the same patience she brought to everything, steady, unhurried, like a woman who had learned a long time ago that rushing didn't actually save time. It just made you tired faster. When she reached the counter, the supply officer, a thick-necked man named Greer, whose name tag was slightly crooked, pushed a standard-issue rifle across the surface without even asking what she needed. "Carbine ammunition allocation sidearm and your standard kit," he said. "Sign at the bottom." Maya didn't reach for the pen. She looked at the carbine, then looked at Greer. "I need to make a specific request," she said. Greer's expression didn't change. "We don't do special requests at issue. I understand that, but this falls under classified operational parameters." She set a form on the counter, a single sheet stamped in a very specific shade of red ink that most people at Raven Ridge would never encounter in their careers. "It's already been cleared at command level." Greer picked up the form, turned it over, looked at the stamp, looked at her. The expression on his face shifted just slightly, not understanding exactly, but awareness that something was outside his normal lane. "What are you requesting?" Maya said it clearly, no hesitation. "The Black Talon." The room did not go quiet immediately. It went quiet in stages. Like a fire burning down to nothing, first the far conversations, then the closer ones, then the sound of someone halfway through a laugh who simply stopped when he heard the words and turned around. A soldier named Torres, 6'2", with arms like support beams, actually let out a full sound somewhere between a laugh and a cough. Did she just... Black Talon. The soldier beside him, a lean, sharp-faced man named Pettit, repeated the words like he was checking to see if the English language had somehow shifted while he wasn't paying attention. The ghost rifle? Torres didn't even try to suppress it. He leaned on the counter and grinned at Maya directly. Hey, while you're at it, can you request a dragon? I've been trying to put in for one since basic. Laughter. Real laughter. Not mean exactly, at least not the kind that came from cruelty. More the laughter of people who believe they're sharing a joke with someone who's in on it, who don't realize yet that she isn't in on it because she doesn't need to be. Maya did not smile. She did not look at Torres or Pettit or the 6 other soldiers who had turned around to see what was funny. She looked at Greer. Greer, to his credit at least, had the professionalism to look slightly uncomfortable. He set her form back on the counter. I can't process this here, he said. I know, Maya said. I expected that. Log the request and flag it to command. That's all I'm asking. Sure, Greer said. The way he said it was not the way a man says yes. It was the way a man says, I will do the minimum required action to make this interaction end. Maya signed the standard form, collected her carbine, and walked away from the counter. Behind her, Torres was still grinning. Black Talon, he said again, shaking his head. New recruits get wilder every year. What nobody in that room understood, what nobody at Raven Ridge understood yet, was that Maya Carter was not a recruit. She had not been a recruit in a very long time. The first week at Raven Ridge operated on a system that was part education and part performance. Instructors watched. They scored. They sorted people into categories with the efficiency of men who had done it so many times the human beings in front of them had started to blur into data points. The categories were informal, but everyone understood them. Top tier. The soldiers who moved through drills with the kind of fluid precision that made observers stop talking. These were the ones instructors pointed to during group sessions, held up as examples, spoke about quietly with the kind of respect reserved for things you didn't want to jinx. Capable. The majority. Solid, professional, dependable. Not spectacular, but not a liability either. The backbone of any operation. Question marks. The transfers who hadn't established themselves yet. The ones whose records were thin or whose specialties didn't immediately translate to Raven Ridge's evaluation methods. By the 3rd day of the first week, most people had already decided Maya belonged in the 3rd category. She didn't help herself by being visible. She didn't seek out conversations. She didn't position herself near instructors, the way ambitious soldiers learn to do early, close enough to be noticed, vocal enough to register. She showed up. She performed the assigned work. She was quiet in exactly the way people assumed quiet meant small. But small details kept surfacing, and they didn't fit. On day 2. During a morning navigation drill through the East Field, the team was moving through a section of low ground when Maya stopped walking. Just stopped. The team leader, a sergeant named Flores, turned around. Problem, Carter. Bearings off, she said. Flores checked his compass. We're on heading. The heading's right. The terrain interpretation is off. There's a drainage cut approximately 80 meters northeast. If we continue on this line, we hit it in about 4 minutes and lose 10 to 15 minutes of time getting around it. Nobody said anything. Flores looked at his map, looked at the terrain, looked back at the map. I don't see a drainage cut on the map. It's not on the map, Maya said. But the ground angle and the vegetation density on the northeast side are telling you it's there. You can read it. Flores studied the terrain for a long moment. Around them, soldiers shifted their weight and exchanged glances. All right, Flores said finally, not because he was certain she was right, but because something in her voice had the specific quality of a person who isn't speculating. Adjust heading 10 degrees north. 7 minutes later, they skirted a drainage cut that would have cost them at minimum 12 minutes. Flores didn't say anything directly to Maya. But that night she noticed him standing near the terrain maps in the briefing room for a long time, studying the eastern field section. She had read correctly, from nothing but the ground and the grass. On day 4, the range exercises began. Raven Ridge had 3 ranges: the close-range facility for speed and movement work, the mid-range facility for standard qualification, and the long-range field, a sprawling open evaluation ground that the instructors treated like a sacred space. You did not underperform on the long-range field without consequences. You did not overperform on the long-range field without earning the kind of attention that followed you afterward, good or bad. Sergeant Ethan Brooks operated in the long-range field like he owned it. In a meaningful sense, he did. At 26 years old, Ethan Brooks had accumulated a shooting record at Raven Ridge that the instructors spoke about with the reverence usually reserved for historical records, things built over decades that current competitors were trying to chip away at. Brooks had set his record in his 2nd year, then broken his own record in his 3rd. He was now in his 4th year as a senior operator and trainer, and the record still stood. He knew it stood. More to the point, everyone around him knew it stood, and Brooks made sure the knowing never got comfortable or forgotten. I was not cruel about it. That would have been too obvious, too easy to dismiss. Brooks operated through something more sophisticated, an ambient sense of authority that he projected not through aggression, but through certainty. When he spoke in the briefing room, he spoke as a man whose accuracy cannot be questioned. When he moved on the range, he moved as a man who is being observed and is comfortable being observed. When he evaluated other shooters, there was always something in his expression that said, "Good, but not this good," no matter what the score was. I was very good. He also believed being very good meant being the best, and those two things are not the same. When Maya's group rotated to the long-range field on day 4, Brooks was already there finishing a practice session. He watched the new group come in with the evaluative gaze. He turned on everything. Most of the transfers got a single scan and got filed somewhere in his memory. Maya got a scan, a pause, and something that might have been a mild frown. "Who's the transfer without a unit patch?" he asked the instructor beside him. "Carter, weapons specialist." "What's her background?" The instructor shrugged. "Sealed records. We don't have much." Brooks looked at Maya for a moment longer. She was checking her carbine, not performing the check for anyone's benefit, just checking it the way people check things when they actually care about the result rather than the appearance. "She's in the wrong facility," Brooks said. The instructor didn't respond. Brooks went back to his own rifle. The range exercise that afternoon was a standard evaluation set. Distance markers, moving targets, wind calls. Nothing designed to surprise. It was diagnostic, built to establish baseline scores before the instructors started pushing variables. Brooks went first in his group as usual. He shot the way he always shot, with the smooth, almost bored efficiency of a man for whom the routine excellence has become so automatic it doesn't require visible effort anymore. His score was what his score always was. The range officer called it. Heads turned. There was a brief collective moment of appreciation, the kind the crowd offered, because it was expected, because it had become ritual. Brooks lowered his rifle without looking at the scores. He already knew. An hour later, Maya stepped up to the line. The group had settled into the comfortable pattern of watching new shooters with mild professional interest. Not dismissive. Raven Ridge had enough professional pride that genuine talent was recognized, but baseline expectations had been established by the week of drills, and the baseline for Maya, in most people's quiet assessments, was solid but not remarkable. The range officer gave the signal. Maya did not raise the carbine immediately. She stood still for 3 full seconds. Pettit, standing 2 positions down the line, almost said something. He stopped himself, but the micro-expression crossed his face, the slight, "What is she doing?" that he would have been embarrassed to admit later. Maya was reading the wind, not with an instrument, with her face. The skin on her cheeks, the pressure against her eyes, the behavior of a small patch of long grass 40 meters downrange that most people in the group hadn't registered as significant data. Then she raised the carbine. The first shot hit before anyone expected it. Then the second. Then the third, fourth, fifth. A rhythm so consistent that 2 of the instructors in the observation area behind the line stopped their own conversation and turned to watch. When the exercise finished, the range officer walked out to check the results. He checked them. He came back and checked the scoring system. He went out a second time. When he came back, he called the score in a voice that was noticeably quieter than it had been when he called Brooks's score. Not softer from less enthusiasm, but softer from genuine surprise. The kind that instinctively lowers your voice because you're not sure yet if what you're seeing is real. The number landed in the silence of the range. Nobody spoke for a moment. Brooks stood still. His jaw was set. His eyes were on the target markers in the distance. Pettit turned to look at Torres. Torres had the expression of a man recalculating something very quickly. The instructor nearest to the line walked over to Maya. "Carter." "Yes, sir." "Where did you train?" The question was asked the way you ask something when you already know part of the answer and you're trying to find the edge of it. Maya had heard questions asked that way before many times by many people. She knew what they were really asking, which was not, "Where did you train?" but "Who are you really, and why don't we know about you?" She gave the same answer she always gave. "I had a reason to learn." The instructor looked at her for a moment. Then he wrote something in his notebook and moved on. Behind her, the atmosphere on the range had shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly. But it had shifted in the way things shift when a category no longer fits, when the slot you put someone in quietly breaks open and you have to decide whether to find a new slot or sit with the discomfort of not having one. That evening in the facility cafeteria, Maya ate alone. She preferred it that way. Not because she disliked people, she understood people very well, sometimes better than they understood themselves. But because the silence after a day of evaluation was where she did her most useful thinking. She reviewed everything she had observed, the terrain she had read, the wind patterns across the range, the way certain instructors moved when they were genuinely interested versus when they were performing interest. She also reviewed the people around her, though not in the way they might have expected. Brooks came into the cafeteria with two other senior shooters. He was laughing at something someone had said. He moved through the room with the ease of a man in his environment table, here greeting, there the small acknowledgments of someone whose position in the social hierarchy is understood by everyone, including himself. He didn't look at Maya when he passed her table. That was information. A man who doesn't look at someone he's registered as irrelevant doesn't have to actively avoid looking. Brooks actively avoided looking. The effort was subtle, but it was there, and Maya filed it quietly. He was recalculating too. He just didn't want anyone to see him do it. On the fifth day, the thing that had been building quietly reached its first visible surface. It happened in the armory. Maya had signed out for individual maintenance, time-standard procedure, nothing unusual, and was at one of the workstations breaking down her carbine for cleaning. She worked quickly, but not frantically. The kind of speed that comes from having done something so many times, it has become a form of thinking where the hands do their work and leave the mind free. An armorer named Bates watched her from the far end of the station. Bates had been at Raven Ridge for 11 years. He had seen thousands of soldiers handle weapons. He had a quiet but precise internal scale for competence, and it was almost never wrong. He watched Maya for 2 minutes without saying anything. Then he walked over and stood beside her, arms crossed. "You're doing the extractor spring wrong," he said. Maya looked up at him, looked down at the component in her hands. She set it on the table. "Show me," she said. Bates blinked. He had expected argument, or at minimum a defensive pause. Not "show me," open, direct, immediate. He picked up the component. His hands moved through the procedure. Precise. Professional. Spring retention goes in first, then the extractor, then the pin. Most people do pin first and wonder why they're getting tension drift. He set it back down. Maya picked it up and did it exactly the way he had shown her. Perfect the first time. Bates watched. "You've done that before," he said. "No," she said. "I've done it differently before. You showed me something better. I'm using your way now." Bates said nothing for a moment. "What weapon system were you running before this?" The question was professional curiosity. Bates asking the way an expert asks another expert, Not the way a skeptic asks someone trying to prove themselves. Maya glanced at him. "Classified," she said. Bates studied her face. Then he nodded the nod of a man who has heard that answer before and respects it. "Good maintenance instincts," he said. He walked back to his station. It was the first direct professional compliment Maya had received since arriving at Raven Ridge. She continued cleaning the carbine, said nothing. But something in her expression, just a fraction, something most people would have missed, shifted for a moment into the territory of something real. Not pride exactly. Something quieter and more careful than pride. Recognition. The smallest kind. The only kind that mattered to her. Outside the armory, the day continued as normal. Torres was telling the Black Talon story to a new group of arrivals who hadn't heard it yet. He had already turned it into something with comedic shape, the setup, the punchline, the reaction. He was good at telling it. People laughed in the right places. And she just stands there, Torres was saying, hands out for emphasis. Dead serious, like she expects the man to open a safe in the back and bring out the ghost rifle, like it's just sitting there waiting for her. Laughter. What did she think was going to happen? One of the new arrivals asked. That's the thing, I don't think she thought anything was going to happen. She just asked, like it was the most normal request in the world. Torres shook his head. Somebody told her the legend and she believed it. You hate to see it. The story was settling into place as a thing the facility would remember, a harmless joke, the kind that accreted around every training cycle, little human moments that gave the days color. Nobody in the group had been on the range that afternoon. Nobody in the group knew what Maya's score had been. If they had, the story might have had a different shape. On day 6, General Marcus Whitaker arrived. He did not announce himself in the way commanding officers sometimes did, the advance word sent down the chain, the preparation that allowed facilities to present themselves at their best. Whitaker had a preference for arriving the way situations arrive, without warning, and expecting to see exactly what was actually happening, rather than the polished version. How was 61 years old, with the kind of face that had been given its current form by 40 years of making decisions that mattered. He had served in 3 conflicts on 2 continents, had commanded units from company level to something the paperwork described in terms most people in this room would never have clearance to read, and had developed through all of it a very accurate internal instrument for recognizing 2 specific things. Real capability, and the gap between real capability and what people believed about themselves. He walked the facility with his aide, Colonel Marsh, and a facility officer named Torres Reyes, who kept trying to summarize things that didn't need summarizing. Whitaker listened to approximately 30% of what Torres Reyes said and spent the other 70% paying attention to the facility itself. What he could see, what was being avoided, what existed in the spaces between the prepared statements. In the afternoon, he reviewed personnel files in a temporary office. Most files read quickly. He had a practiced eye for the shape of a career record, the patterns that indicated where someone came from, what they were built for, what kind of stress they would hold or break under. He reached Maya Carter's file and stopped. Not because it was impressive, because it was absent. A weapons specialist with 6 years of documented service, but documentation that referenced higher clearance records. He could access only partially, that gestured toward mission histories without naming them, that contained performance evaluations with specific scores redacted and replaced with classification codes. He had seen files like this before. Not many, maybe 30 in his entire career. Every one of them had told him the same thing. This person has been doing work that most people in this building cannot be told about. He read what he could read. Then he called Colonel Marsh. Pull whatever you can on Carter. Maya specialist, he said. I want to know what I'm actually looking at. Marsh made a note. Whitaker went back to the file. He looked at the single unredacted entry near the bottom, a field assessment note brief, written in the compact language of someone who didn't have time or inclination for elaboration. Operator demonstrates consistently correct judgment under elevated stress conditions. Accuracy maintained. Composure maintained. Recommend continuation. Redacted. He set the file down, looked at the wall. Then he picked it up again and read the operational request logged on her first day at Raven Ridge, Black Talon Precision Platform. Request flagged by supply. Cleared red stamp unprocessed. Whitaker read that line 3 times. Then he stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the evening was settling over Raven Ridge. The ranges were quiet. The facility lights were coming on in sequence across the yard. Whitaker stood there for a long moment. Then he went back to his desk and made 2 calls. The first was to the facility armory. The second was to a secure logistics line that most people in the building didn't know existed. Maya didn't know about the calls. She was in the barracks reading. Not a training manual. Not a tactical reference. A novel-worn paperback, the kind that's been read multiple times and has the gentle structural damage of a book that's been loved rather than preserved. The barracks had settled into the quiet rhythm of evening. A few soldiers talking at the far end. Someone writing a letter. The familiar sounds of a military facility when it is between its obligations and doing the human things that fill the gaps. Pettit wandered over and sat on the edge of the adjacent bunk. I was not a bad person, Pettit. He had the specific social intelligence of someone who was smart enough to recognize when his first impressions had been too simple and honest enough to be bothered by it. That score today, he said. Maya looked up from her book. It was real right, he said. I mean, nobody touched the targets before the officer checked them. Nobody touched the targets, she said. Pettit nodded slowly. Where did you... He stopped himself. Rephrased. How long have you been shooting? Long time. What were you running before this assignment? She looked at him with the same level, unhurried gaze she turned on everything. That's a sealed record question. Right. He looked at his hands. Sorry. Don't be. She went back to her book. It's a reasonable thing to wonder. Pettit sat for another moment. Then, for what it's worth, Torres is still telling the Black Talon story like it's a joke. Maya turned a page. I know, she said. Does that bother you? She considered the question with the genuine seriousness she gave to all questions. No, she said. Why not? She looked up at him again. Because the rifle is real, she said. What Torres thinks about it doesn't change that. Pettit opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Do you actually think they'll... Good night, Pettit, Maya said. He stood up. Right. Good night, Carter. He walked back to his bunk, lay down, stared at the ceiling for a while. Something about the way she had said the rifle is real, the absolute unconcerned certainty of it was doing something to his thinking that he couldn't quite resolve. He eventually fell asleep, still working on it. 3 doors down from the barracks in the facility office, a message came back through the secure logistics line. Colonel Marsh read it. Read it again. Walked to the temporary command office and knocked. General, the Carter file. I have what you asked for. Whitaker looked up. Sit down, he said. Tell me everything. Colonel Marsh set the folder on the desk without sitting down. That alone told Whitaker something. In 40 years of military service, he had watched hundreds of officers deliver information, and he had learned to read the delivery before the content. Marsh was a composed man, methodical, unflappable, the kind of officer who could brief a disaster with the same even tone he used to read a weather report. The fact that he was standing, that his hand was still on the folder, like he wasn't sure he was ready to let go of it, said more than the first 3 pages would. Talk to me, Whitaker said. Marsh opened the folder, looked at it, then looked at the general. Carter Maya, age 29, classified unit designation, Black Talon Division. 6 years of active operational service, all of it outside standard deployment records. He paused. She's not a weapons specialist, sir. That's the cover classification. Whitaker leaned back. What is she? Precision Elimination Operator, Tier 1. The Black Talon Division was a program that ran for 9 years under a joint command structure that I don't have full clearance to access even now. Marsh turned a page. What I can access tells me they ran 18 documented operations over 6 years, all classified above this facility's clearance level. Success rate on mission objectives is listed as 94%. The room was very quiet. 18 operations, Whitaker repeated. Yes, sir. In environments and conditions that the standard mission profile would have considered non-viable. Situations where the assessed probability of objective completion was below 30%. Whitaker stood up, walked to the window. Outside the facility grounds were settling into the late-night quiet he had always found clarifying the way everything simplified when the noise of the day dropped away, and you were left with only the things that were actually true. Why is she here? He said. Not the cover reason. The real reason. Marsh turned another page. His expression shifted slightly, the specific shift of a man who has found something he wasn't expecting and is still processing what it means. 3 years ago, the Black Talon division ran an operation that went wrong, Marsh said. Extraction failed. 4 operators didn't come home. Carter was the only survivor. He closed the folder. After the debrief, she declined every reassignment offered. Declined commendation. Declined promotion. She requested, and I'm reading her exact words here, to be placed somewhere she could be useful without being visible. Whitaker turned from the window. Raven Ridge, he said. Yes, sir. The transfer wasn't punishment. It was her choice. She asked for it specifically. Marsh set the folder on the desk. She wanted to teach. She just didn't want anyone to know that's what she was doing. Whitaker looked at the folder for a long moment. Then he picked it up and read the operational request Maya had filed on her first day. The Black Talon request. The one that had been logged and ignored and turned into a joke that Torres was still telling in the barracks. He set the folder back down. The rifle request, he said. Yes, sir. It wasn't theatrical. No, sir. According to the weapons program records, the Black Talon platform was developed specifically for the division's operational parameters. Carter is one of 4 living operators with full certification on the system. Whitaker picked up the folder one more time. He looked at the name. Then he set it down and picked up his phone. Get me the secure logistics coordinator, he said. And find out where Carter is sleeping tonight, because tomorrow is going to be a very different day for her. Marsh was already moving toward the door. One more thing, Whitaker said. Marsh stopped. Who's been giving her the hardest time? A pause. Sergeant Brooks, sir. Senior shooter facility record holder. He's been vocal. Whitaker nodded slowly. The specific nod of a man filing something away. Good, he said. Make sure he's at the range tomorrow. Maya woke at 5:15 without an alarm. She had not used an alarm clock in 6 years. Her body had learned through the specific education of necessity to wake when it needed to wake, sleep when it could, and never confuse one for the other. In the field, that skill was the difference between being ready and being caught. At Raven Ridge, it simply meant she was always the first one up, which gave her 40 minutes of silence before the barracks started moving, and those 40 minutes were the best part of her day. She used them to think. She thought about the navigation drill, about the way Flores had adjusted his heading without explaining why to the rest of the group, which was either professional discretion or the beginning of someone protecting their ego from the admission that a transfer with no visible record had read the terrain better than they had. She thought about the range scores and what they would produce in the people who had witnessed them, the specific uncomfortable recalculation that happens when someone doesn't fit the category you built for them. She thought about Brooks, not with anxiety, with the analytical distance she brought to anything that was going to require management. Brooks was not a villain in this story. He was a very good shooter who had built his identity on being the best shooter in the room. And now there was a person in the room who had changed that equation, and he hadn't processed it yet. He would process it in one of 2 ways. He would become hostile, or he would eventually become honest. She didn't know yet which way he would go. She was paying attention. At 5:55, the barracks began waking. The familiar sounds. Boots on floor. Someone failing to suppress a cough. The low murmur of men moving from sleep into the first obligations of the day. Maya had already made her bunk read 20 pages and drunk half a canteen of water. Pettit appeared from the far end, looking like sleep had not been entirely cooperative. He saw her sitting upright, book closed, completely alert, and stopped walking for a moment. "How long have you been awake?" he asked. "A while," she said. He processed this. Do you sleep like a normal person? Define normal. He pointed at himself, unconscious and drooling until the last possible moment. Despite herself, Maya almost smiled. I sleep. I just don't need as much of it as most people. Petit looked at her with the expression he'd been wearing since the range, the look of someone revising their understanding of something and not entirely comfortable with the revision. Carter, he said, what actually happened in the supply room with the Black Talon request? You were there, she said. I was there for the part where everyone laughed. I wasn't there for whatever came before it. Whatever made you think the request was going to work? Maya looked at him. I didn't think the request was going to work that day. I made the request because it needed to be in the system. That's all. Pettit stared at her. That's all? You made a request you knew was going to get laughed at on purpose, just to put it in the system. The system processes things at its own pace, she said. You have to give it the information before it can act on it. He opened his mouth, closed it. You sound like you knew something was going to happen. Maya stood and picked up her carbine. Get some breakfast, Petite, she said. Today's a long day. She walked out of the barracks. Pettit stood there for a moment, looking at the door she'd gone through. Then he said to nobody in particular, she absolutely knew something was going to happen. The morning started with a briefing that nobody read between the lines correctly, which was exactly how Whitaker intended it. The announcement was framed as a routine evaluation. Expansion, additional range time, extended exercise, parameters, command-level observation of facility performance metrics. Standard language. The kind of bureaucratic phrasing that soldiers learned to parse for what it actually meant, and what it actually seemed to mean in this case was simply that a general was going to watch them shoot, and everyone should perform accordingly. Brooks heard the announcement and adjusted his posture almost imperceptibly, the specific straightening of a man who knows he performs well under observation and sees an opportunity in that fact. He found Torres in the corridor after the briefing. Command observation, Torres said. Brooks, this is your stage. Always is, Brooks said. But there was something slightly too practiced about the confidence, something that lived just a fraction of a millimeter outside, completely natural. Torres didn't notice. Most people wouldn't have. Maya noticed. She was passing them in the corridor when Brooks said it, and her eyes moved to his face for exactly 1 second, reading the thing behind the certainty before she continued walking. Brooks watched her pass. Hey, Carter? She stopped, turned. When the general's watching this afternoon, Brooks said, try not to request any ghost rifles. It's getting old. A few soldiers nearby smiled. Maya looked at him with the same level expression she used for everything. Not cold exactly, not hostile, simply present. Like she was giving the moment exactly the attention it deserved, and nothing more. I'll keep that in mind, she said. She turned and kept walking. Brooks watched her go. The smile on his face faded slightly after she turned away, not because he was embarrassed, but because something about her lack of reaction was genuinely confusing to him. He knew how to read responses. Wounded, defensive, trying, too hard, visibly angry. He had cataloged all of them, had learned what each one meant about the person producing it. The absence of any of those responses was information he didn't have a category for yet. He went to breakfast. He ate more than usual, faster than usual. He told himself it was because he wanted extra energy for the afternoon. The morning exercises were navigation and tactical assessment. Maya moved through them with the same quality she brought to everything. Not drawing attention, not fading back, simply performing at the level the task required and no higher than necessary. But the morning had a different texture than the days before it. Two of the instructors were moving differently, more deliberate, making small notations at intervals that weren't part of the standard evaluation cycle. One of them, a senior instructor named Caldwell, stopped near Maya twice during the morning assessment and observed her work without saying anything. Not the observation of a critic looking for errors. The observation of a man who has been told to look carefully and is taking that instruction seriously. Maya registered both stops, said nothing. At 11:30, Colonel Marsh appeared at the edge of the training area. He spoke briefly with Caldwell. Caldwell listened, made a note, and they both looked briefly in the direction of the group, in the direction specifically of Maya. Torres saw this. "Hey," he said quietly to Pettit. "Why is the colonel here for morning nav assessment?" Pettit looked over, looked back. "Probably command observation prep. Colonels don't prep for range observation in person during nav drills," Torres said. Pettit had no answer for that. He also found himself looking at Maya, who was completing the last navigation checkpoint with the focused quiet that was becoming familiar, who showed no awareness of being observed by anyone above the facility instructor level, or showed no visible awareness. Pettit was starting to understand that those two things were not necessarily the same with her. Lunch was 30 minutes. Maya ate efficiently, not because she was anxious, but because she had learned that wasted time was a decision you made, and she preferred not to make it unconsciously. She was finishing when Caldwell sat across from her. This was unusual. Instructors ate with instructors. The hierarchy of meals at Raven Ridge was not formally defined, but it was rigidly observed. Maya set her utensils down and waited. "Carter," Caldwell said. "Sir, this afternoon's range evaluation. I want you to know that the parameters have been expanded." "I heard the briefing," she said. "What you didn't hear in the briefing," Caldwell said, and his voice dropped slightly, not conspiratorial, but private, the voice of a man choosing to give information rather than deliver it, "is that General Whitaker personally reviewed your transfer file last night." Maya's expression did not change. "He has questions," Caldwell said. "He's welcome to ask them," she said. Caldwell studied her. "Is there anything about this afternoon you want to flag to me before it happens?" "No, sir. Nothing that might surprise anyone." She looked at him directly. "Nothing that will surprise me." Caldwell looked at her for another moment. Then he stood and picked up his tray. "Good," he said. "That's probably what matters." He left. Maya sat alone for the remaining 8 minutes of the lunch period. She thought about the afternoon, about what Whitaker had found in her file and what it might have told him, about the request she had filed on day 1, sitting in the system, waiting for the system to catch up to it. She thought about the Black Talon. Not with anticipation exactly. With the specific focused readiness of a person who has been waiting for a door to open and hears for the first time footsteps on the other side. The range that afternoon was more populated than it had been for any previous evaluation. Word had moved through the facility, not the real word. The rumors didn't have that information yet, but the general shape of something is happening had traveled the way. Those things always traveled in closed facilities, through tone, through posture, through the way people moved and where they chose to position themselves. There were soldiers at the observation line who had not been scheduled for range evaluation. There were instructors who had signed in for attendance without clear operational reason. Bates the armorer was standing near the equipment station at the far end of the field, which was not where armorers usually stood. Brooks was at the firing line with his group rifle in hand, running pre-evaluation checks with the smooth efficiency of a man who had done this so many times, it had become muscle memory. He was performing focus. There is a difference between a man who is focused and a man who is performing focus, and Maya could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way his eyes moved to the observation area, and then moved carefully away, like he was checking, without wanting to be seen checking. Maya was in the third shooter group. She found her position in the staging area and waited. Pettit was 2 spots away from her. He leaned over. "General's not here yet," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "Does that seem Pettit?" "Yeah. Watch the road that comes in from the north gate." He looked at her. Then after a moment, he turned his head very slightly and watched the road. 4 minutes later, a vehicle came through the north gate. Pettit turned back to her. His expression had changed. "How did you know which gate?" he said. "It's the only approach that keeps the arrival out of the line of sight from the main range until command wants it visible," she said. "Tactical habit." Pettit stared at her. "You've been here 1 week." "I read the facility layout on day 1, she said, while everyone was laughing. The vehicle stopped. General Whitaker stepped out, and everything about the afternoon changed. Whitaker did not move toward the observation platform immediately. He stood by the vehicle for a moment, hands behind his back, and let his eyes move across the range with the slow, comprehensive sweep of a man who is reading a room before he enters it. His gaze moved across the firing line, the staging area, the observation positions. It stopped at Maya. Not for long, 2 seconds at most. Then it moved on. But 2 seconds is a very readable unit of time to anyone paying attention, and several people at the range were paying very careful attention. Brooks registered it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Torres registered it. He looked at Maya, looked back at the general. His expression was doing something complicated. Caldwell registered it and made a small note. Maya registered it and did absolutely nothing. No change in posture, no shift in expression, no acknowledgement that anything had happened at all. Whitaker walked to the observation platform. Colonel Marsh was beside him. They spoke briefly. Marsh made a gesture toward the staging area toward Maya's group specifically, and Whitaker nodded once. The range officer called the afternoon evaluation to order. Brooks went in the first group. He shot as well as he ever had. Maybe better. The urgency of the afternoon had sharpened something in him, that competitive edge that good athletes find when the stakes feel real, when there is something worth performing for. His score was the score of a man at the peak of his ability, giving everything he had. The range was quiet when his numbers were called. Whitaker listened to the score without visible reaction. He made no note. He did not confer with Marsh. He looked at the staging area, at Maya. Brooks saw him looking. Something crossed Brooks's face, then a flash of something that moved too fast to fully identify somewhere in the territory between uncertainty and the beginning of real fear. Not fear of Maya exactly, fear of the thing. He was starting to suspect the thing that was assembling itself from all the data he'd been collecting and refusing to draw conclusions from. The fear of a man who realizes he might have fundamentally misread a situation that matters. He controlled it. He was very good at controlling things, but Maya saw it. The second group went. Good scores across the board. The range had the charged atmosphere of people performing at elevated levels. The collective heightening that happens when something important is felt to be at stake, even before anyone has defined what that something is. Then the range officer called the third group. Maya stood up. She walked to the firing line, and Brooks, who was standing in the cleared shooter area to the right of the line, said not quietly, not privately, in the carrying voice of a man who had not yet learned the lesson that was coming. "Let's see if the ghost rifle shows up for her." Scattered laughter. Uncomfortable laughter, already thinner than it would have been a week ago, already carrying the slight uncertainty of people who are no longer entirely sure what they're laughing at. Whitaker at the observation platform did not react to the comment. He looked at Marsh. Marsh looked back. Something passed between them, the silent confirmation of men who have decided something and are watching the moment arrive. Whitaker turned to Caldwell, who had positioned himself near the platform. "Caldwell," Whitaker said. "Sir?" "Bring it out." Caldwell spoke into his radio. At the far end of the field, near the secure equipment station, where Bates was standing, a vehicle that had been parked since before the evaluation began, opened its rear compartment. 2 personnel in full equipment handling protocol removed a case. A long case, matte surface, 4-point locking system. The kind of case built not to impress, but to protect something that could not be replaced. The case came down the field. Every head turned. The laughter stopped. Not slowly. Immediately. Like a light switched off. Torres stopped mid-sentence. Pettit felt something happen in his chest that he would later describe as his heart briefly forgetting its job. Even Brooks controlled certain armor-plated Brooks stopped moving entirely and stared at the case coming toward the firing line. The range officer accepted the case, opened it, and there it was. The Black Talon. Not a rumor. Not a legend. Not a ghost story. Torres had been turning into a punchline all week. A weapon. Real, precise, undeniably present lying in its case, with the particular authority of a thing that has been real all along, while people debated its existence. The silence on that range was the most complete silence Maya had experienced since arriving at Raven Ridge. Whitaker stepped off the observation platform. He walked the length of the field past the frozen faces, past Brooks, who had not moved, past Torres, who had the expression of a man watching his own certainty dismantle itself piece by piece. He stopped in front of Maya. She was looking at the rifle. Not with theatricality, with the quiet attention of someone looking at a familiar thing after a long absence. "Commander Carter," Whitaker said. The rank he used was not her cover rank. It was her real rank, at the word commander. Something moved through the range, a ripple of recalculation, audible, almost the sound of 40 people simultaneously revising everything they thought they knew. Whitaker looked at her steadily. "I believe you made a request on your first day." "I did, sir," she said. He gestured toward the case. "Show them," he said quietly. Maya looked at him for one moment, and in that moment, something passed across her face that she rarely let surface. Not pride, not vindication. Something older than both of those things. Something that lived in the territory of grief and resolve, and the specific dignity of a person who has carried something heavy for a very long time without asking anyone to notice. Then it was gone. She reached down and picked up the Black Talon. The way she picked it up answered every question anyone on that range still had. She didn't handle it the way you handle something impressive. She handled it the way you handle something that knows you. The specific muscle-deep familiarity of an operator and her weapon. The kind of fluency that cannot be faked, cannot be learned in a week, cannot be performed. She raised it, found the target, and Brooks, standing 6 feet away, watching her face as she looked down range, realized something in that moment that hit him harder than anything he'd experienced in 4 years at Raven Ridge. The woman had never been trying to prove herself. She had never been asking for attention. She had simply been waiting with perfect patience, with absolute certainty, for the moment when the truth would walk through the door on its own. And the truth had just arrived. The shot broke the silence. Then the second. Then a sequence that the range officer would spend 20 minutes verifying because the numbers seemed on first reading impossible. They were not impossible. They were just Maya Carter. Exactly who she had been on the day she walked in with worn boots and a thin file and asked calmly and without apology for the only weapon in the building capable of keeping up with her. The score came back in 23 minutes. 23 minutes, during which nobody on that range spoke at a normal volume. Nobody moved to leave, and Sergeant Ethan Brooks stood in the exact spot where he had been standing when the first shot broke the silence. Not because he had chosen to stay, but because his legs had not yet received the instruction to move. The range officer walked back from the target verification point with the expression of a man carrying information he is still personally processing. He stopped in front of General Whitaker. He said the number quietly, which was a decision his body made without consulting his training. Because training said, call the score clearly, and for everyone, but something in the weight of the number made him instinctively protect it for just a moment longer. Whitaker heard it, nodded once. "Say it out loud," Whitaker said. "For the range." The range officer turned, called it. The number went through the crowd, the way certain things go through crowds, not as sound, but as impact. You felt it before you fully processed it. It displaced something. Several soldiers looked at each other with the specific expression of people checking whether someone else heard the same thing they heard, because hearing it alone didn't feel like enough confirmation. Torres heard it and sat down on the equipment case behind him. Not dramatically, just sat down, like his body made a quiet executive decision. Pettit closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Opened them. The number was still true. Brooks heard it and finally moved. He took 3 steps away from the line, turned his back to the range, and stood very still with his hands at his sides. His breathing was controlled. His jaw was controlled. Everything about him from the outside was controlled. Inside, something was coming apart slowly, the way ice comes apart in warming water. Not all at once, not with drama. Just a steady giving way of something that had been load-bearing. He had set the Raven Ridge record in his 2nd year. Maya had exceeded it. On a weapon system she had been handed 10 minutes ago. On a range she had been on for 6 days. With a rifle, she had been told publicly, repeatedly did not exist. Whitaker let the silence hold for exactly as long as it needed to hold. He understood. Silences understood that some of them did more work than any words could, that some lessons needed to be felt in the body before they could be known in the mind. He had spent 40 years learning the difference between a silence that was empty and a silence that was full, and this one was the fullest he had experienced on a range in 20 years of commanding facilities. Then he spoke. "Secure the weapon," he said to Caldwell. Then he turned to the range, all of it, every face. "Debrief, 1 hour, main briefing room, every shooter, every instructor, every observer present on this range today." He walked off the field without looking back. Colonel Marsh fell into step beside him. "Sir," Marsh said quietly, "how do you want to handle the disclosure?" Whitaker didn't answer immediately. He walked 20 more steps through the quiet that had settled over the field like weather. "The truth," he said. "All of it. They've earned it." Maya put the Black Talon back in its case herself. She didn't hand it to Bates. She didn't step back and let the handling protocol personnel take over immediately. She went through the post-use sequence, the specific checks, the verification, the safe state procedure, with the quiet efficiency of someone performing a ritual they have performed many times in many places under many different conditions. Bates watched her do it. When she finished and stepped back, he moved forward to complete the secure transfer. But he stopped for a moment beside her. "Black Talon Division," he said. Very quiet. Not a question. She looked at him. "My younger brother served with a man who talked about the division," Bates said. "He said they were the kind of operators who went in when everyone else had already decided a situation was unrecoverable." He paused. "He said that they never came back bragging." Maya held his gaze. "How was right?" she said. Bates nodded. Carefully, with the weight of someone who understood what he was acknowledging. Then he picked up the case and carried it to the vehicle. Maya turned back to the range. Most people had started moving toward the main building for the debrief. The field was thinning. But Torres was still there, standing 15 feet away, and he was looking at her with an expression that had moved entirely outside the comfortable territory of the man who had been telling the Black Talon joke all week. He looked like someone holding something he had been handed and wasn't sure he deserved. "Carter," he said. She waited. "The thing I said, in the supply room, the unicorn comment." He stopped. His jaw worked for a moment. "And every time after that, when I was telling people, Torres," she said. He stopped. "You didn't know," she said. "You made the only assessment you could with the information you had. That's not something to apologize for." He stared at her. "I was laughing at you." "I know. That doesn't bother you." She looked at him steadily. "What bothers me is when people who should know better choose not to," she said. "You didn't know better. There's a difference." Torres opened his mouth, closed it. Something in his face shifted, the specific shift of a man who had been braced for a harder landing and was recalibrating for a completely different kind of impact. "I'm going to be thinking about this for a long time," he said. "Good," Maya said. "That's where learning lives." She walked past him toward the main building. Torres stood on the empty range for another moment, alone with the thing she'd handed him. The briefing room held 47 people. Whitaker stood at the front without notes. He had never needed notes for the conversations that mattered. Notes were for information transfer. What he was about to do was something different. He looked at the room. Let it settle. "What happened on the range today is going to require context," he said. "And I'm going to give you that context because you've earned the right to have it, and because what you do with it matters." He clasped his hands behind his back. 6 years ago, a classified program called Black Talon Division was operational under a joint command structure that most of you don't have the clearance to access in full. The division ran precision operations in non-viable environments, situations where standard mission assessment had already determined success probability was below 30%. In 6 years, they ran 18 operations. He paused. They completed 17. The room was absolutely silent. The mission that didn't complete was 3 years ago. The division deployed a 4-person team into an extraction scenario that deteriorated faster than any pre-mission modeling had predicted. The team encountered a situation that required improvisation beyond the parameters of the mission design. He stopped. 3 operators were killed. 1 survived and completed the objective alone under conditions I will not describe in this room, because most of you would find them difficult to believe. Nobody moved. That operator, Whitaker said, has been sitting in your staging area for the past 6 days, while some of you told jokes about ghost rifles. The weight of that sentence fell into the room like a stone into still water. It did not land violently. It landed with the particular density of truth, the kind that doesn't splash, but simply sinks, and you feel it going down. Brooks, sitting in the second row, felt it go all the way to the floor. Commander Maya Carter requested assignment to Raven Ridge. Whitaker continued. She did not request recognition. She did not request accommodation. She did not request the deference that her record warranted and that every person in this room would have given her if they had known who she was. He let that sit for a moment. She requested a teaching assignment. Her words in the official request were, "I want to be useful without being visible." Pettit, 3 rows back, felt something happen behind his eyes that he was not going to examine too closely in a room full of soldiers. She made 1 operational request on her first day, Whitaker said. She asked for the Black Talon precision platform, the weapon system she was certified on, designed for, and has operated in conditions that qualify as some of the most demanding combat precision work in the history of this program. He looked at the room. Some of you thought that request was funny. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was not supposed to be. The lesson I want you to take out of this room today is not about the rifle, Whitaker said. The rifle is a tool. The lesson is about what you assumed, and why you assumed it, and what those assumptions cost you in terms of what you could have been learning from the moment she walked through the gate. He looked at Brooks, not with hostility, with something more complex than that. With the direct, unflinching gaze of a man who is offering an honest reckoning rather than a punishment. Brooks met his eyes. His face was expressionless, the controlled kind of expressionless. "Sergeant Brooks," Whitaker said. "Sir, your range record stood for 2 years. Yes, sir. How does it feel to have it broken?" The room held its breath. Brooks sat with the question for 3 full seconds. And in those 3 seconds, the room watched a man make a choice. Watched him stand at the fork between the version of himself that would deflect, that would find some technical distinction or circumstantial qualifier, and the version of himself that would simply tell the truth. "It feels like I needed it to happen," Brooks said. "Sir." Whitaker looked at him for a moment longer. Then he nodded. "That answer," Whitaker said to the room, "is the beginning of something useful." The debrief ended 30 minutes later, but the room didn't empty quickly. People moved slowly with the particular heaviness of bodies that are waiting for their minds to finish processing before full mobility returns. Conversations started in low voices, not the normal post-briefing chatter, but something more careful, more honest. Maya was near the back. She had sat in the last row, which was habitual, a positioning choice she made in every group setting, a reflex from years in operational environments, where knowing who was in front of you mattered. She was standing now, and she had expected to be able to move toward the door without incident. She had not accounted for Brooks, how was coming against the current of the emptying room, moving toward the back, and his trajectory was deliberate. He wasn't someone who moved without purpose. She watched him come and stood still. He stopped in front of her. For a moment he didn't speak. He was choosing words, she could see it in his face, the specific expression of a man who understands that the wrong phrasing will undermine the right intention. "I said things on the range," he said. "Not just today, the whole week. He stopped, started again. "I was using you to stay comfortable. It's easier to dismiss someone than to deal with what they make you feel about yourself." Maya looked at him. "Is that an apology?" she said. "It's an explanation first," he said. "The apology is that I'm sorry, for all of it. The comments, the dismissal." He paused. "And for the part I played in making this place feel like somewhere you had to prove your right to be." Somewhere behind him, Torres was listening. So was Pettit. Neither of them pretended they weren't. Maya studied Brooks for a moment. "You're a good shooter," she said. He blinked. That was not what he had expected. "You're technically excellent," she continued. "Your form is disciplined. Your wind reading is accurate. Your consistency under observation is better than 90% of what I've seen at this level." She paused. "But you've been shooting for the score for so long that you've forgotten what the score is supposed to represent." Brooks was very still. "The score is a measurement," she said. "It's not the thing. The thing is whether you can deliver when it's not a range, and there is no score, and the person next to you is depending on what you can do. That's what you need to be building toward. That's the only measurement that has ever mattered to me." Brooks absorbed this. His jaw moved slightly, not defensively, thoughtfully. "How do I get there?" he asked. And something in the directness of that question, its lack of ego, its simple, honest reaching toward something better changed Maya's expression by the smallest possible degree. "You already started," she said. "The answer you gave the general in there. That was the first honest thing I've heard you say since I arrived." She moved past him toward the door. Brooks turned to watch her go. Torres appeared at his shoulder. "You all right?" Torres said. Brooks thought about it. "No," he said. "But I think that's the right answer for right now." Torres nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think it probably is." That evening, Whitaker met with Maya alone. The office was small and spare, the temporary kind, the kind built for function rather than comfort. Whitaker had never had much use for comfortable offices. He believed that comfort was a thing you sought outside of work, and that bringing it inside work was a kind of softening. He didn't trust. Maya sat across the desk from him. She had her hands in her lap, her posture straight but not stiff, the posture of someone who is completely at ease and has simply forgotten to perform relaxation. Whitaker studied her for a moment. "How are you?" he said, not as a greeting, as a real question. "I'm functional," she said. "That's not what I asked." She held his gaze. "I know." He leaned back. "I read the incident report from the operation 3 years ago, as much of it as I could access." Something changed in Maya's face. Not much. A slight settling, like ground shifting an inch. It was the look of someone hearing a reference to a wound they carry well, but carry nonetheless. "Then you know what happened," she said. "I know the operational facts," he said. "I don't know what it was like." "No," she said. "You don't." He didn't push. He let the answer be what it was. "You lost 3 people," he said. "Yes." "And then you came here, to teach." "Yes." "Why here specifically?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because Raven Ridge is where operators come from," she said. "The people who are going to be in those situations, the non-viable environments, the 30% probability scenarios, they come through facilities like this first. And they come through learning things about themselves, and about precision, and about the relationship between capability and purpose. That's either correct or it isn't." She paused. I wanted to be in the room while those things were being learned. Even anonymously," Whitaker said. "Especially anonymously." He looked at her. "You understand that's no longer possible." "I understood that when you called the logistics line," she said. "I heard the vehicle come through the north gate." Whitaker almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "The Black Talon goes back to secure storage tomorrow," he said. "I know. But I'm formally adjusting your assignment parameters. You're not a transfer weapons specialist anymore." He picked up a folder from the desk, her file, the one Marsh had assembled from the partial records. "Your actual designation, your actual rank, and your actual function here are going to be disclosed to facility command level." He looked at her. "You'll be running an advanced precision curriculum that doesn't exist yet because I'm going to build it around what you know. Your unit's operational experience will become a teaching resource." Maya was quiet. "Your teammates," Whitaker said carefully, "who didn't come home. Their work, what they understood, what they developed, What they gave in those 18 operations, that knowledge shouldn't die with the program. It should be in the next generation of operators who come through this gate. The thing that crossed Maya's face then was not something she suppressed. For once, she didn't try. It moved through her expression with a kind of weight that the room absorbed, rather than witness the specific grief of a person hearing their loss described as something that still has a future. She looked down at her hands, then up. "Yes, sir," she said. Whitaker nodded. "One more thing," he said. She waited. "Sergeant Brooks is going to come to you," he said. "Probably tomorrow. He's going to want to learn something real. Not just the technical improvement, something from the place where your shooting actually comes from." He paused. "Don't turn him away." Maya looked at the general for a long moment. "I wasn't going to," she said. She was right about Brooks. He came to the range at 05:30 the next morning, which was 30 minutes before any scheduled activity, which she knew because she had been there since 0500. He stopped when he saw her. "You knew I was coming," he said. "I thought it was likely," she said. He stood there for a moment. The early hour had a quality of honesty about it, the specific clarity of a time of day when the social performances of daylight hadn't fully assembled yet, when people were slightly more simply themselves. "I've been shooting for score for so long," he said, "that I don't know what else to shoot for." Maya looked at him. "What made you start?" He blinked. It was clearly not the question he expected. What made you start shooting, the first time? Before records, before evaluation, before Raven Ridge? What was the original reason?" He opened his mouth, closed it. The question was doing something to him, reaching back past the years of performance and evaluation and record-keeping to something earlier, something simpler. "My father," he said finally. "We used to go out early on Saturdays, before anyone else was up. He wasn't military, he was a machinist. But he believed that there was something in the practice of precision, the attention it required. He said he used to say that if you could learn to hold still and pay attention, you could do it with anything, not just shooting." He stopped, like he'd surprised himself with the memory. "That's it," Maya said. "What?" "That's what you lost, the holding still and paying attention. Somewhere between Saturday mornings with your father and the Raven Ridge record, you replaced it with the need to be the best rather than the practice of being present." She looked at him. "They feel like the same thing. They are not the same thing." Brooks stood with that. "How do I find it again?" he said. Maya picked up her carbine and handed it to him. "We start from the beginning," she said. "Not your beginning at Raven Ridge, your actual beginning. Saturday morning. Your father. The thing he was really teaching you." Brooks took the carbine. He held it differently than he normally held it. Or maybe the same, but with a different awareness of what he was holding. "Okay," he said. "One more thing," Maya said. "What?" "When I correct something, you say thank you and you implement it. Not because I outrank you, that's not what this is about. Because the correction is a gift, and gifts should be received properly." Brooks looked at her. Something in his face was very young for a moment. Younger than 4 years at Raven Ridge, younger than a record on a board, younger than the decorated certain senior shooter who had told a woman with worn boots that she was in the wrong facility. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Maya nodded. "Find your position," she said. And Brooks, for the first time in 4 years, held a weapon at a range and felt something that was not about the score. Meanwhile, in the facility cafeteria, Torres and Pettit were having the kind of breakfast conversation that gets remembered years later. "I keep thinking about what she said," Torres said. "About how it's not an apology-worthy thing when you don't know better." "She let you off easy," Pettit said. "That's what's getting me," Torres said. "She didn't have to. She had every reason to make me feel terrible about it, and she didn't." He pushed his food around. "What kind of person does that? Someone who's done something harder than making you feel bad," Pettit said. Torres looked at him. "She watched 3 people die," Pettit said quietly. "And then she came here under a fake classification to teach people who were laughing at her. Whatever she's carrying, it's heavier than anything we've said to her. which means she made a choice about how to use her energy, and making us feel bad wasn't worth the expense. Torres was quiet for a long time. That's the most depressing and the most inspiring thing I've heard in the same sentence, he said finally. Yeah, Pettit said. Welcome to thinking about Maya Carter. Torres looked at the cafeteria entrance, then back at his food. I'm going to be a better soldier because of this week, he said. Me too, Pettit said. I hate how it happened. Me too. They finished breakfast in silence. That was for the first time that week, a comfortable kind. The kind that exists between people who have processed something real together and come out the other side, a small, important fraction wiser. That night in the temporary command office, Whitaker wrote the first draft of what would become his official facility assessment. He wrote many things about training protocols and evaluation structures and the gaps between what Raven Ridge was teaching and what operational environments actually demanded. But the first line he wrote before any of the structural analysis, before the recommendations and the resource requests, was this: the most significant development of this evaluation period was not a score or a system or a procedural finding. It was the arrival of an operator who had every reason to lead with her credentials and chose instead to lead with her character. Everything that follows in this report is secondary to that observation. He read the line back, left it exactly as it was, outside the window. Raven Ridge was quiet. The ranges were dark. The barracks were settled into the long breathing of people who were most of them lying in the dark and thinking about a woman who had walked in with worn boots and a thin file and no visible insignia, and had in 6 days changed the shape of what they understood about themselves. Not by demanding it, not by proving it with force, simply by being with complete consistency exactly who she was, until the truth became too large and too present and too undeniable for even the loudest room to talk over anymore. Brooks showed up the next morning with something different in his eyes. Not humility. Exactly. Humility was too soft a word for what was happening to him. It was more like demolition. The specific interior demolition of a man who had spent 4 years constructing a very precise identity and was now standing in the rubble of it, not broken, but genuinely uncertain what to build next, and honest enough with himself to admit it. Maya saw it the moment he arrived at the range. She didn't comment on it. She simply handed him a datasheet, range conditions, wind variables, target specifications, and said, "Read that. Tell me what you'd adjust before your first shot." Brooks read it. He gave her his answer. It was technically correct, thorough, exactly the kind of answer a Raven Ridge record holder would give. "Now tell me why," she said. He stopped. "Why? You gave me the adjustments. Tell me why each one. Not the formula. The reasoning behind the formula." Brooks looked at the sheet again. He started talking through it, and about 40 seconds in, he stopped himself. Because he'd hit a wall he hadn't known was there. A place where the technical knowledge ended, and beneath it was not more knowledge, but habit. Repetition without understanding. The rote execution of procedures he had performed so many times, he had stopped knowing why they worked, and simply knew that they did. "I don't know the why on the third adjustment," he said. He said it plainly. No qualifier, no deflection. Maya looked at him with an expression that was as close to approval as she publicly displayed. "That," she said, "is the most useful thing you've said to me since I arrived." She sat down beside him and started explaining the physics. Not the formula, the actual physical reality beneath the formula. The way air behaved, the relationship between humidity and bullet travel, the micro-variables that the adjustment was compensating for, and why those variables existed in the first place. Brooks listened the way he hadn't listened to anything in 4 years. Like it was new. Like he was back on a Saturday morning with his father, and the point wasn't the target, it was the attention. 40 minutes later, Pettit arrived for his scheduled range time and found them still sitting there deep in a conversation that had moved from wind physics to operational pressure, to the specific question of how you maintain accuracy when someone's life depends on the next shot and your hands know it. Pettit stood at the edge of the range for a moment. He didn't interrupt, he just listened. And something in what he heard reached back and rearranged something quiet inside him that he hadn't realized needed rearranging. 3 days passed. The facility had a different rhythm now, not dramatically different, not transformed overnight. The way stories sometimes suggest things transform, but changed in the specific way that real change happens incrementally in small decisions, in the way people chose to speak to each other, and what they chose to ask. Questions were different. The kind of questions being asked in debriefs and hallway conversations over meals, they had more depth now. Less performance, more genuine inquiry. Soldiers who had been asking questions designed to demonstrate their own competence were starting to ask questions designed to actually learn something, and the difference once you saw it was unmistakable. Maya noticed it. She didn't comment on it publicly, but she noticed. What she also noticed and kept carefully to herself was that she was starting to feel something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Useful. Not functional. She had been functional since the day she left the debrief room after the operation that took her team. Functioning was the baseline, the floor, the minimum. She had held herself to it with both hands through the worst of what came after, through the long silence of recovery, and the longer silence of grief, and the particular silence of a person trying to decide whether there was a version of the future worth building toward. Useful was different. Useful was the thing above the floor. It was the feeling of mattering in a direction of energy, going somewhere that would outlast the moment it was spent. She was careful with it. She didn't trust it completely yet. 3 years of loss had taught her that good feelings required the same rigorous assessment as everything else, that hope without examination was just another kind of carelessness. But she let herself feel it a little. In the careful, measured way, she let herself feel most things. She was standing in the armory after a morning session returning equipment when Caldwell appeared in the doorway. "Commander," he said. She looked up. She was still adjusting to the rank being used openly. It landed differently each time, not uncomfortably, but with the slight dissonance of something that fit correctly after years of wearing the wrong size. "We have a situation," Caldwell said. His voice had the specific quality that she had learned to read in operational environments. The quality of someone who is controlling the delivery of information, because the information itself is not controlled. She set the equipment down. "What kind?" "New incoming transfer group," he said. 14 operators. They arrive tomorrow morning." He paused. 3 of them served under classification structures adjacent to the Black Talon program. One of them... He stopped. Maya looked at him steadily. "Say it." "One of them was in the division. Not your cohort. The year before. He was medically separated after the Karachi operation." Caldwell met her eyes. "His name is Reeves. Daniel Reeves." The name landed in the room like a dropped weight. Maya was very still for 3 full seconds. Reeves. She knew the name. She knew the operation. She knew what Karachi had cost him, not from a file, from the kind of knowing that exists between people who have been in the same water, even if not at the same time. The Black Talon community was small. Its losses were personal, even when they were names you'd never met in person. "Is he cleared for full duty?" she said. "Medically cleared, yes. 2 years of rehabilitation and reassessment. The separation was injury-based, not performance-based." Caldwell paused. "He doesn't know you're here." Maya absorbed this. "Does he know about the range demonstration?" "Word travels," Caldwell said carefully. "What he knows I can't tell you exactly." Maya was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. "Is that going to be a problem?" Caldwell said. She looked at him with the directness she brought to everything. "I don't know yet," she said. And the honesty of that answer, the refusal to perform certainty she didn't have, was the kind of thing Caldwell had not heard enough of in his 22 years at this facility. "Fair enough," he said. He left. Maya stood alone in the armory. She thought about Daniel Reeves, about Karachi, about what a man carries out of an operation like that, and whether 2 years of rehabilitation is enough time to make peace with what it took from him. She thought about what it would mean to have someone in the facility who understood the division from the inside, not as legend, not as debrief summary, but as lived experience. She thought about whether that was going to feel like company, or like reopening something that had only recently begun to close. She didn't reach a conclusion. She went back to work. The transfer group arrived at OT 700 the next morning. 14 operators. They came off 2 vehicles with the full folder energy of the group that had arrived with Maya a week and a half ago. Visible patches, confident postures, the carrying of credentials that announced themselves before anyone spoke. They were a good group. Maya could see that from across the yard. The way they moved, the way they deployed attention, the specific quality of professional readiness that distinguished genuine operators from people performing the appearance of it. She watched from the far side of the processing yard. She found Reeves before anyone introduced him. He was the one not talking. Not because he was withdrawn, the body language wasn't closed. He was present, alert, engaged with his surroundings in exactly the way she recognized because she did it herself. He was reading the facility the same way she had read it on day one, cataloging it, building a spatial understanding before anyone asked him to perform in it. How was her height exactly, which she hadn't expected? Some piece of her had constructed a physical image from the Karachi mission profile, and this man didn't match it. He was lean in the way of people who have come back from significant physical damage and rebuilt muscle over scar tissue. The body remade, but not erased. He walked with a very slight asymmetry in his right stride that most people wouldn't have caught, that Maya caught immediately and filed away without judgment. He found her about 30 seconds after she found him. Their eyes met across the yard. There was a moment, 4 seconds, maybe 5, where both of them simply looked. Not recognition exactly, because they had never met, but something adjacent to it. The specific acknowledgement of 2 people who speak the same language meeting in a country where nobody else does. Then Sergeant Doyle started reading names off his clipboard, and the moment passed into the ordinary mechanics of arrival processing. But it had happened, and they both knew it. The first formal interaction came 2 hours later in the equipment issue room. Maya was there on unrelated business. She had a maintenance request to file with Bates when the transfer group moved through for issue. She was at the far end of the counter when Reeves reached the front. She didn't move toward him. She waited. He collected his standard kit, signed the form. Then he looked down the counter and saw her. He picked up his equipment and walked to her. Direct, no performance. "Carter," he said. "Reeves," she said. They looked at each other for a moment. "I heard about the range demonstration," he said. "Word travels," she said. Caldwell's phrase. It fit. Black Talon platform. He said it with the specific weight of someone for whom those words carried operational memory rather than legend. How'd it feel? The question was asked the way only someone who had used the weapon could ask it, not about the score, not about the drama of the reveal, but about the actual physical experience of holding it again after time away. "Like coming home to a house where some of the rooms are locked," Maya said. Reeves was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I know that feeling." They stood in silence for a beat that would have been uncomfortable between strangers, and was something else entirely between them. "Karachi," Maya said. His jaw moved slightly. "You know the operation." "I know what it cost." "Then you know I didn't exactly come out of it with a clean record." "You came out of it," she said. "That's its own kind of record." Something shifted in Reeves's expression, moved through it quickly, almost too fast, but she caught it. The specific expression of a man who has been carrying a weight that other people keep trying to reframe as lighter than it is, and who is not sure whether this reframe is another one of those attempts or something different. "Are you saying that to make me feel better?" he said. "No," she said. "I'm saying it because it's operationally true. You made decisions in Karachi that kept you alive. The mission outcome wasn't a function of your choices. It was a function of intelligence failures, 2 levels above your deployment. You know that." Reeves looked at her. "I know it intellectually," he said. "Yeah," she said. "The intellectual knowing is the easy part." He almost smiled. "Not quite." "What's the hard part?" he said. "The 3 a.m. part," she said. "When it's quiet and the intellectual knowing goes offline." He looked at her for a long moment. "You too," he said. Me too, she said. It was the most honest thing she had said to anyone at Raven Ridge, the most personally honest, and she had said it in the equipment issue room standing next to a supply counter that smelled like gun oil to a man she had met 45 minutes ago. That was how it worked sometimes. You met the people who could hold the real conversation in the most ordinary circumstances, and the ordinariness of the setting didn't diminish the conversation. It just meant you had to be willing to have it wherever it arrived. Reeves picked up his equipment. I heard you're running the advanced precision curriculum, he said. Building it, she said. Running it eventually. I'd like to be part of it. She looked at him. You're going to have to go through the standard evaluation first. I can't make exceptions for prior division service. That's not how this works. I know, he said. I'm not asking for an exception. I'm asking to be in the room when you're teaching. Maya was quiet for a moment. Show me something real on the range first, she said. Then we'll talk. Fair, he said. He walked out with his kit. Bates materialized at Maya's elbow about 10 seconds later. Former division, Bates said quietly. Yes, Maya said. Bates nodded slowly. He walks like someone who's rebuilt something. He has, she said. She filed her maintenance request and left. The evaluation of the new transfer group began that afternoon, and what happened in the next 3 hours was the moment that Raven Ridge's staff would later describe as the day the facility fully understood what it was dealing with. Because Maya ran the evaluation, not Caldwell, not the standard range officer. Maya, with Whitaker's explicit authorization, designed and executed an assessment protocol that nobody at the facility had seen before. Not because it was dramatic or unusual in its components, but because the components were assembled with a logic that revealed exactly what each shooter's actual capability was, rather than what their best performance under optimal conditions looked like. She introduced variables, not arbitrary variables, environmental factors, time pressure decision requirement insertions, that forced operators to make judgment calls mid-sequence. She built in moments where the technically correct answer and the situationally correct answer were different things, where the person who had been training for the score and the person who had been training for the reality would diverge. The divergence was immediate and unmistakable. 3 of the 14 new transfers performed brilliantly. Not because they had the highest raw scores, 2 of them didn't, but because their decision-making under the variable conditions was consistently grounded in situational reality rather than evaluation optimization. They were shooting for the real thing. You could see it in the choices they made when the protocol broke from standard and gave them options. The other 11 performed competently. Some of them performed very competently. But the gap between technical competence and operational judgment was visible in a way that the standard evaluation would never have revealed. Brooks watched the whole assessment from the observer line. He had asked Maya that morning if he could observe the new group's evaluation. She had said yes. He stood there for 3 hours and watched the protocol she had designed expose things about operational readiness that 4 years of standard Raven Ridge evaluation had never once surfaced, and he felt something happening in his chest that was uncomfortable and necessary in equal measure. He was watching his own record be rendered irrelevant, not unjustly, not unfairly, with complete accuracy. The record he had held, the one that had been for 4 years, the primary evidence of his own worth in this place, was a record within a system that measured the wrong things. It was a high score on a test that wasn't quite asking the right question. He had known this somewhere. The way you know things you're not ready to know, you push them to the peripheral. You let them exist at the edge of awareness without looking at them directly, because looking directly means you have to do something about it. Maya had forced him to look directly. At the end of the evaluation, she gathered the new group and delivered a debrief that was concise, specific, and completely without softening. She named what she had seen. The strengths clearly, the gaps clearly. She named them without judgment but without omission. Either the specific clarity of a teacher who understands that dishonest feedback is a form of abandonment. Reeves was in the group. He had performed in the top 3. Not first one of the other transfers had edged him on the decision sequence segments. But he had performed with the quality that she had expected, the quality of someone who had rebuilt their skill from the ground up, and in the rebuilding had been forced to understand it more deeply than the original construction. When she reached his evaluation in the debrief, she gave it the same direct assessment as everyone else. No special acknowledgement of his background. No softening for what Karachi had cost him. He didn't want that. She knew he didn't want it. That was why she didn't give it to him. After the debrief, as the group dispersed, Reeves caught her eye across the room. He gave the smallest nod. The nod of someone who has been assessed accurately and respects the assessment. She returned it. That was enough. That night, the facility had a quality that Maya had not felt since her arrival, a quality she could only describe privately as collective intention. As if the population of Raven Ridge had over 10 days of incremental reckoning arrived at a shared understanding that they were here to build something real, and the building of it required them to be honest about what they actually were versus what they wanted to be seen as. It was not complete. It would not be complete for months, maybe longer. Real change in institutions was slow and imperfect, and frequently 2 steps forward, followed by a step back. She knew this. She had seen institutions attempt transformation and succeed partially, and fail partially, and produce something in between that was better than what came before, even if it fell short of what it had hoped to become. But the intention was there. She could feel it. She was in the small office that Whitaker had allocated for her curriculum development work when Brooks knocked on the open door. It was 2100 hours, late by facility standards. "Do you have a minute?" he said. "Yes," she said. He came in, sat down. He had a notebook, physical, spiral-bound, the kind people use when they're working through something they want to be able to look at, rather than just think. "I've been writing things down," he said. "From the morning sessions, from the range assessment today, from things you've said." He opened the notebook. "And I keep coming back to one question that I can't answer from my own head." "Ask it," she said. He looked at her. "How do you stay motivated after you've lost something in the division? After the operation, how did you get back up and decide that the work still mattered?" The question landed in the room with the weight of something genuinely important. Not a technique question, not a performance question. A question about the interior life of a person in a specific and brutal kind of pain. Maya looked at him for a long moment. "What makes you ask that?" she said. "Because I've been thinking about what happens when I eventually leave this facility," he said. "And I realized I have no idea who I am when I'm not the record holder. When I'm not the best shooter in the room. When I'm just a person with a skill in a world that doesn't give out scores." He paused. "And I realized that's probably the same question you had to answer, just with higher stakes." Maya set down what she was working on. "The night after the debriefing," she said, "when they told me the other 3 weren't coming back, I sat in a room alone for 6 hours. She was quiet for a moment. I kept waiting to feel the thing people describe, the resolve, the purpose, the decision to go on for the ones you lost. The movies give you this moment of clarity, this rising music." Brooks watched her. "It didn't come," she said. "What came instead was just morning. The next morning. I was still there, still breathing. And the only thing I could think of was that the information in my head, what the division knew, what those 3 operators had taught me, what we had all built together, was going to disappear from the world if I stopped." She looked at him. "That's not a noble reason. It's a practical one. But it was enough to get me out of the room." Brooks was very still. "And then," he said. "And then I found the next practical reason," she said. "And then the one after that. And at some point, enough practical reasons stacked up that the thing underneath them changed shape." She paused. "It's not a single decision. It's about 10,000 small ones." Brooks looked at his notebook. "I don't have anything on the level of what you've been through," he said. "No," she said. "But you have your version of it. That's what counts." He was quiet. "The record," he said. "When you broke it. What did that feel like from your side?" She considered the question honestly. "Like it was the wrong measurement all along," she said. "Not because your record wasn't real. It was. You earned it. But a record at a facility is a local fact." What you're capable of is a much larger fact, and the record had started to stand between you and knowing what that larger fact actually was. He sat with that. You broke my record to set me free, he said. I broke it because I could, she said. What you do with it is your business. He almost laughed. Not quite. But something in his face lightened, a genuine lightening, the kind that happens when a weight shifts rather than disappears. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, she said. The curriculum I'm building is going to be harder than anything you've done at this range. He closed his notebook and stood. Good, he said. He meant it. She could hear it. What nobody at Raven Ridge knew, yet what Whitaker knew, and had said nothing about sitting on it with the careful patience of a man who understood that information deployed too early becomes noise, was that the Black Talon curriculum that Maya was building was not just for Raven Ridge. A proposal had been submitted, quietly, through channels that most facility personnel would never access. A proposal to create a standardized advanced precision and operational judgment curriculum based on the Black Talon Division's operational methodology to be implemented across 7 Tier 1 training facilities, to be led by its architect, to be, in the language of the proposal, a permanent program rather than a temporary assignment. Whitaker had submitted it 3 days after Maya's range demonstration. He had not told her yet. How was waiting for the right moment, which was the kind of thing he had learned to be patient about. About the understanding that the right information at the wrong moment was simply a problem wearing different clothes. The response came back on the evening of day 11. Marsh brought it to the office. Whitaker read it, set it down, picked it up and read it again. The proposal had been approved. Not modified, not conditionally approved, not sent back for revision. Approved, with a budget allocation and a timeline and a directive that the program begin formal development within 60 days. 7 facilities, hundreds of operators per year going forward. Whitaker sat with this for a long time. He thought about Maya Carter walking through the Raven Ridge gate with worn boots and a thin file and a request that made 30 soldiers laugh. I thought about the patience it must have taken. The specific, extraordinary load-bearing patience of a person who knows exactly who they are and exactly what they carry and chooses to wait in silence for the world to be ready to receive it. He thought about what that kind of patience cost. He thought about what it was worth. Then he picked up his phone. "Get me Commander Carter," he said. A pause on the other end. "Sir, it's 2200 hours. I know what time it is," Whitaker said. "Get her." Maya answered on the second knock. She was awake, of course she was awake. She had the look of someone who had been reading, which meant she had been thinking, which was what she did when she was awake, and nobody needed her for anything specific. "Sir," she said. "Walk with me," he said. She fell into step beside him. They walked the facility perimeter, a route Whitaker had taken every evening since arriving, the habit of a man who processed things best when his body was moving. He told her about the proposal. He told her about the approval. He told her the number 7 facilities, the budget, the timeline, the scope. She walked beside him in silence through all of it. When he finished, she said nothing for a full minute. He let the minute be. "They're building it around the division's methodology," she said finally. "Yes. That means their work." She stopped. "The 3 operators, what they knew, what we built together. Goes forward," Whitaker said. "Yes." Another silence. When she spoke again, her voice was level, the controlled level of someone who is holding something very large and making sure their hands are steady. "They would have wanted that," she said. "I know," Whitaker said. They walked another 50 steps. "There's one condition," she said. He looked at her. "The program carries their names," she said. "The 3 operators. I want their names on the curriculum documentation, not mine, theirs." Whitaker stopped walking. She stopped beside him. "I'll make it happen," he said. She nodded. Once. They turned back toward the facility. The night was very quiet. The kind of quiet that sits around things that have finally found their right shape, the specific stillness of something that has been in motion for a long time and has arrived. Maya walked beside the general in that quiet. And for the first time in 3 years, she let herself believe that what she was building might be larger and longer lasting than anything that had been taken from her. Not instead of this grief, not in place of the loss, alongside it, as the thing that made the loss mean something beyond itself. That was enough. That had to be enough. And slowly, carefully, with the same rigorous honesty she brought to everything, she let it be. The approval document sat on Whitaker's desk for 2 days before he told anyone else, not because he was withholding it. He had already told Maya, and that conversation had settled into the facility, like rain into dry ground. Quietly, without fanfare, changing things at the root level before anything was visible on the surface. He waited because he understood institutions well enough to know that information released too broadly, too fast, became rumor before it became fact. And rumor had a way of distorting things that were still fragile enough to be distorted. What he didn't anticipate was that Maya would tell someone herself. She told Reeves. She did it the morning after Whitaker's walk in the same quiet way she did most things, directly without ceremony, as information being shared between two people who had the context to understand what it meant. They were at the range, early, the way both of them preferred. 7 facilities, she said. Reeves stopped what he was doing. The division's methodology, she continued, formalized, built into the training structure of the program going forward. He was very still for a moment. Whose idea, he said. Whitaker submitted the proposal, but the methodology is the division's. Reeves set down his equipment. He looked at the range, at the distance, the targets, the open air that had held so many of the conversations the division had ever had in one form or another, on ranges exactly like this one, across 15 years of operational history. Vasquez would have laughed, he said. Maya looked at him. My cohort, he explained. Vasquez, before Karachi. He always said the division's methods would outlast the division itself. He said we were building something bigger than any single operation. Reeves's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't come home from Karachi either. The name fell between them, with the specific weight of names that belonged to people who deserved more time than they got. Then he was right, Maya said, and he gets to be right forever now. Reeves looked at her. The expression on his face moved through several things too quickly to name individually: grief and pride, and something that lived in the difficult territory between them. The place where loss and meaning occupy the same space, and you have to hold both at once, or you can't hold either. You're 3, he said. Their names go on the curriculum documentation, she said. I made that a condition. Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Good, he said. His voice was not entirely steady, and he didn't try to make it so. That's exactly right. They stood together in the early morning quiet of the range. No shots fired. No evaluation running. Just 2 people who had come from the same place and lost the same kinds of things, standing in the particular solidarity of survivors who have found against probability something worth building with what remained. Then Maya picked up her carbine. Show me your wind read from yesterday, she said. You were pulling left on the 3rd sequence. Reeves blinked. The transition from the weight of what they'd just shared to the immediate technical correction was so abrupt it almost startled him. Then he picked up his own weapon. I wasn't pulling left, he said. The crosswind shifted. The crosswind shifted 2 seconds before your 3rd shot, she said. You felt it, and you compensated late. That's a pull. He looked at her. You timed the crosswind shift. I time everything, she said. Position. He almost smiled. Found his position. She was right about the pull. He knew she was right before she even confirmed it, because the physical memory of the shot was still in his hands. And now that she'd named it, he could feel exactly where the late compensation had occurred. How do you see things that fast? He said. I stopped looking at the target a long time ago, she said. The target is the last thing. Everything else comes first. He absorbed this, filed it somewhere deep. Same principle off the range, he said. She looked at him. People, he said. You read people the way you read wind. I've been watching you do it all week. Maya considered denying it, then decided that was a waste of time. Yes, she said. So what do you read in me? He said. Right now, honestly. She studied him for a moment. The specific direct study of someone who is actually answering the question, rather than constructing a diplomatic version of it. Someone who rebuilt himself after a catastrophic loss, and is not entirely sure the rebuilt version is as good as the original, she said. And who hasn't figured out yet that the rebuilt version is actually better, not because it's stronger, but because it knows things the original didn't. Reeves held her gaze. "How do you know it's better?" he said. "Because you asked that question," she said. "The original version of most people doesn't ask that question. It already knows the answer because it decided the answer before the question arrived." He was quiet. "That's either the most reassuring thing anyone's ever said to me," he said, "or the most terrifying." "Probably both," she said. "Fire." He fired. The shot was clean. No pull. He lowered the weapon. "See?" she said. He didn't answer. But something in the set of his shoulders changed, a small, genuine release of something that had been held too long. The kind of physical thing that happens when a person believes for the first time in a while that they might actually be exactly where they're supposed to be. On day 14, Brooks did something nobody expected. He asked to be removed from the senior shooter evaluation roster. Not permanently. He submitted a formal request in writing to Caldwell, asking to be re-evaluated under the new assessment protocol. Maya had designed the variable condition judgment-intensive protocol she had run on the new transfer group, rather than continuing to carry his existing score as his active rating. Caldwell read the request twice. Then he walked it to Maya's office. He set it on her desk without saying anything. She read it. She read it again. "He's asking to start over," Caldwell said. "I know what he's asking," she said. "Is that—" Caldwell searched for the word. "Is that wise? His existing score carries significant institutional weight. His standing here is built on it." "That's why he's doing it," she said. Caldwell looked at her. "Because the standing is built on the wrong thing. Because he finally knows that," she said, "and he can't unknow it." She signed the approval on the request, handed it back to Caldwell. "Schedule him for Thursday," she said. Caldwell took the form, paused at the door. "You changed him," he said. "He changed himself," she said. "I just made it unavoidable." Caldwell left. Maya sat alone in the office for a moment. She thought about Brooks walking into that evaluation Thursday, his existing record set aside, his 4 years of institutional credibility voluntarily surrendered, standing on the line with nothing but what he actually was. She thought about what it took for a person to make that choice. The specific courage of willingness to be honestly measured. It was not a small thing. It was, in fact, one of the largest things she had witnessed at this facility. She went back to work on the curriculum. Thursday came. Brooks stood at the line under the new protocol with an expression that was entirely different from anything the range had seen from him before. No performance. No ambient certainty radiating outward. Just a man at a firing line present in the specific and uncomplicated way that Maya had described as the only way that ever mattered. Torres and Pettit were both watching from the observer line. They had not been told to be there. They had simply appeared the way people appear for things that matter. The protocol ran. All the variables, all the judgment insertions, all the moments where the technically correct answer and the situationally correct answer diverged, and the shooter had to choose between performing and thinking. Brooks chose every time to think. His raw score was lower than his old record, mathematically objectively lower on the distance and accuracy metrics. His situational judgment score was the highest Maya had seen from anyone at Raven Ridge. When the assessment finished and the results were compiled, she stood in front of him with the sheet in her hand and gave him the same direct, unsparing feedback she gave everyone. She told him where he was excellent. She told him where the gaps remained. She told him which specific aspects of the variable conditions had exposed limitations he needed to address. She told him his judgment score. He looked at the number for a long moment. "That's not the record," he said. "No," she said. "It's better than the record." He looked up at her. "How can it be better if the number is lower?" "Because the record measured the wrong thing," she said. "This measures the right thing. A high score on the wrong measurement is a liability. A developing score on the right measurement is a foundation. Brooks looked back at the sheet. I have a lot of work to do, he said. Yes, she said. Will you keep working with me? She looked at him. The man who had told her on day one that she didn't belong here. The man who had made the ghost rifle comment when the general was watching. The man who had in the space of 2 weeks chosen, with increasing consistency, to face things he could have avoided. Yes, she said. Torres at the observer line exhaled something that was not quite a breath and not quite a word. Pettit looked at him. You okay? I'm good, Torres said. His voice was slightly unsteady in the way voices get when they're working to stay even. I'm just watching someone become a better version of themselves in real time is kind of a lot to absorb. Pettit nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. It really is. The first official session of the new curriculum ran 3 weeks after Whitaker's walk. 12 operators, the top performers from both the existing Raven Ridge cohort and the new transfer group. Brooks was there in the front, which was new for him. He had always positioned himself in the middle of groups, the position of a person who is watched rather than a person who is watching. Reeves was there. Pettit. 3 of the new transfers who had distinguished themselves in Maya's initial assessment. Maya stood at the front of the room with nothing on the table in front of her. No notes. No slides. No prepared materials of the conventional kind. She started talking. Not about technique. Not about the platform specifications or the historical parameters of the Black Talon program. She started talking about a specific operation, unnamed location, redacted from anything she said, personnel referred to by role rather than name, that illustrated the precise moment when technical excellence and operational judgment diverged and what happened in the gap between them. The room was silent in the way rooms are silent when everyone in them is fully present. She talked for 40 minutes without stopping. The room stayed with her every second of it. When she finished, she looked at the 12 operators in front of her. Questions, she said. 12 hands went up simultaneously. Something happened in Maya's face. Then the smallest thing visible for only a second before she controlled it back to professional neutral. But Reeves saw it because he was watching for it, because he had learned in 3 weeks of working alongside her to look for the things she chose not to perform. It was the look of a person who has found the reason they survived, not the tactical reason, not the practical reason she had described to Brooks in the late-night office, the stacked practical reasons that had gotten her out of the room the morning after, and the morning after that, and all the morning since. The deeper reason. The one that doesn't arrive on demand, that cannot be constructed or reasoned into existence, that only appears when the circumstances have aligned in a way that makes it undeniable. She was looking at 12 people who needed exactly what she carried, and she was the only person alive who could give it to them in the specific form it needed to be given. She answered the first question, then the second. Then a conversation began in that room that would continue in various forms for months. The living, breathing transfer of something that had nearly died with 3 operators on a mission 3 years ago, and had instead been carried here through silence and patience, and the particular grace of a woman who understood that the most important thing she would ever do in her life was not a mission she had completed, but a knowledge she had preserved. 6 weeks after Maya's arrival at Raven Ridge, General Whitaker sat in his temporary office and wrote his final facility assessment. He had been writing it in pieces for 2 weeks. The standard operational analysis, the personnel evaluations, the structural recommendations. All of that was finished and filed. What remained was the section he had left for last. The section that was technically optional. The section that nobody at his level was required to include in a facility assessment, but that he had found himself unable to omit. He called it simply an observational addendum. He wrote for 40 minutes. He wrote about what it looked like when institutional culture was genuinely changed, rather than superficially adjusted. He wrote about the difference between the facility he had arrived at and the facility that now existed, not in its physical structure, not in its formal protocols, but in the quality of attention people brought to their work, the quality of honesty they brought to their self-assessment, the quality of care they brought to each other. He wrote about Brooks standing at the line. Thursday, voluntarily giving up the credential that had defined him, choosing to be honestly measured. He wrote about Torres stopping him in the corridor 2 days ago to ask genuinely, and without any career motivation, what he should be reading to better understand the gap between technical proficiency and operational judgment. He wrote about Pettit, who had started arriving at the range 30 minutes early to work through the assessment protocol on his own, without being asked, without being watched. He wrote about Reeves, who had walked into this facility carrying 2 years of rehabilitation and the specific weight of a mission that had taken everything from him, and who was now visibly rebuilding, not toward what he had been before Karachi, but toward something more considered, more grounded, more genuinely capable. And then he wrote about Maya. He wrote about her for a long time. He wrote about worn boots and a thin file and a request that made 30 soldiers laugh. He wrote about the patience of a woman who understood that real things do not need to announce themselves. He wrote about the specific courage it took to carry grief for 3 years and transform it into something that would outlast the grief. He wrote about what it looked like to lead without asking to be seen as a leader to teach, without performing the role of teacher to change a place, without ever declaring the intent to change it. He finished the addendum, read it back, left it exactly as written. Then he picked up his phone and called the program director overseeing the 7-facility curriculum expansion. "The instructor you're getting," he said without preamble. "Commander Carter, I want you to understand what you're receiving." A pause on the other end. "General, she's not a curriculum developer," he said. "She's not a training specialist in the conventional sense. What she brings, is something the program has needed for longer than anyone at your level has been willing to admit." He paused. "She's going to be difficult to manage. Not because she's difficult, because she's right, more often than administrative structures are comfortable with. Protect that. Don't optimize it away." Another pause. "Understood, sir." "Good," Whitaker said. "That's all." He hung up, looked at the assessment on his desk. Then he signed it. The night before Whitaker left Raven Ridge, he found Maya in the curriculum office. She was working on Session 3 materials. He could see through the open door, the organized density of someone who thinks in systems, the specific productive order of a person who is building something and knows exactly what shape it needs to take. He knocked on the open door. She looked up. "Come in, sir," she said. He did. Sat in the chair across from her desk, the same chair Brooks had sat in that Caldwell had used, that had become in the weeks of Maya's occupancy of this office, the chair where real conversations happened. "I leave tomorrow morning," he said. "I know," she said. "The program director will be your primary contact going forward. His name is Hargrove. He's competent, well-intentioned, and occasionally threatened by people who are better than him at things he values." He paused. "Be patient with him." The corner of Maya's mouth moved almost imperceptibly. "I'll try," she said. "The curriculum materials, the first 3 sessions," he said. "They're exceptional. Not technically, they're what I expected. The exceptional part is the philosophy embedded in them. The way the assessment of judgment is woven into every technical exercise. The way it becomes impossible to separate shooting from thinking." He looked at her. "That's what the division built. That's what those 3 operators understood." Maya set down what she was holding. "Their names go on the cover page," she said. "Hargrove knows." "He does," Whitaker said. "I made sure." They sat in a moment of shared quiet, the particular quiet of 2 people who have built something together and are standing at the moment before it moves into the world on its own, which is both the satisfaction and the loss of the creative act, the thing you made now belonging to something larger than the making of it. "Sir," Maya said. He looked at her. "What made you pull the file?" she said. "On day 1. When Marsh logged my request and nobody processed it, what made you look?" Whitaker considered this. "The stamp on your request form," he said. "The red classification stamp. I've seen that specific stamp 12 times in 40 years. Every time I've seen it, the person carrying it turned out to be someone I needed to pay attention to." He paused. "I paid attention." Maya nodded slowly. "And the Black Talon request itself," she said. "What did you think when you first read it?" "I thought, Whitaker said that a person who requests the right tool on their first day, knowing full well they're going to be laughed at, is a person who is planning further ahead than anyone around them realizes. He looked at her. I was right. Maya looked down at the curriculum materials on her desk. I wasn't planning, she said quietly. I just needed the system to have the request, so that when the moment came, it was already there. That's what planning looks like from the inside, Whitaker said. She was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about the three of them, she said. About whether they would recognize what we're building as something they would have built. What do you think? Whitaker said. She didn't answer immediately. She sat with the question the way she sat with everything, without rushing it, without filling the space before she was ready. Yes, she said. I think they would. I think they would have built it better. But I think they would recognize it as theirs. Then you've done exactly what you came here to do, Whitaker said. He stood. She stood. He extended his hand. She shook it, the firm, direct handshake of two professionals who have built something real together and know it. Commander Carter, he said. General, she said. He walked to the door, stopped. One thing, he said without turning back. Sir. Stop wearing the worn boots, he said. You've earned better. A pause. The boots are comfortable, she said. He walked out without responding. But in the corridor alone, he allowed himself the smile he'd been managing for 6 weeks. Takang. The morning he left, the entire facility assembled in the yard. Not because they were ordered to, because word had passed through Raven Ridge in the early hours, through the barracks and the mess and the range and the armory, and people had decided individually and without coordination that this was a morning to be present for. Whitaker walked the line. He was not a demonstrative man. Nobody who knew him expected a speech or a performance of feeling. He walked the line, and he looked at each face, and he said something to several people that nobody else could hear. When he reached Maya, he stopped. He looked at her for a moment. The 3 names, he said. On the curriculum cover. I want you to know I read them. All 3 of them. I read their partial operational records. He paused. They were extraordinary. Maya did not look away. Yes, she said. They were. He nodded once, moved on. He reached the end of the line, got into the vehicle. The vehicle left through the north gate, the gate nobody could see from the main range. The approach he had arrived by the route that kept things private until they were ready to be visible. The assembly dispersed. Maya stood in the yard for a moment after the vehicle was gone. Reeves appeared beside her. How do you feel? He said. She thought about it honestly. Like the first chapter is finished, she said. And the second. She looked at the facility around her. At Brooks walking toward the range with the early morning energy of a man who had found his reason to work again. At Pettit falling into step beside him, asking something, the two of them moving into conversation with the natural ease of people who have stopped performing for each other. At the new transfers emerging from the barracks, with the purposeful movement of operators who have understood earlier than most that they are in a place that will genuinely change what they are capable of. At Raven Ridge, which had been one thing when she arrived and was becoming something else, not through command decision or structural mandate, but through the slow, real, irreversible process of people choosing to be honest about what they were and reaching toward what they could become. The second chapter started the day I walked through the gate, she said. Reeves stood beside her. What do you need? He said. She picked up her carbine. Range time, she said. I've been teaching all week. I need to shoot. He fell into step beside. I'll come, he said. I know, she said. They walked to the range together. The Black Talon operator, who had survived the unsurvivable, and the division man, who had rebuilt himself from the wreckage of Karachi. And the morning opened around them with the particular quality of mornings that exist at the threshold of something large. The quality of a day that knows it is carrying the weight of something that will matter. At the range, Maya loaded the carbine. She didn't rush. She didn't perform the ritual for anyone watching. She did it the way she did everything, with complete attention, with the respect for the work that came from understanding what it cost. She raised the weapon, found the target. And in the moment before the shot, in that precise stillness that she had spent a career learning to inhabit. She thought about 3 people who had built this knowledge alongside her and would never stand on another range again. She thought about them not with grief. In that moment, the grief lived elsewhere in the 3 a.m. hours, and she had made her peace with that, but with something quieter and more permanent. With gratitude. For what they had taught her. For what they had built together. For the specific gift of people who made you better than you would have been alone, and who left that gift behind, even when they could not stay. She thought, your names are on the cover. 7 facilities. Hundreds of operators forward into time who will learn what you knew without knowing your names. But I know them. And the work knows them. And that is enough. That is exactly enough. The shot broke clean. Then the second. Then a sequence of shots that Reeves, standing 6 feet away, watched with the quiet reverence of someone witnessing a person operate at the fullest expression of what they are not. For a score, not for a record, not for 30 soldiers watching, and a general to impress. But because the work was real, and the work mattered, and the work was hers. When she finished, she lowered the carbine. She did not look at the target. She looked at the open air above it, the clean, uncomplicated sky of early morning. Then she turned to Reeves. Your turn, she said. And at Raven Ridge, on a range that had once rung with the laughter of 30 soldiers, mocking a woman who asked for a rifle. Nobody believed existed the work that 3 fallen operators had given their lives to build continued forward into the world, carried by the one person who had ever been quiet enough, patient enough, and strong enough to make sure it survived. Not because she was fearless, because she understood with the full and unsparing clarity of someone who had looked directly at the worst things and kept walking. That some things are worth carrying, no matter the cost. And that the people who taught you what those things were deserve to live on in the carrying. That was Maya Carter. That was always who she had been. From the moment she walked through the gate in worn boots and asked without apology and without fear for the only tool worthy of what she had come here to do.